Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, Elevating Indigenous Excellence in STEM, part two of our panel discussion. I'm Elizabeth, one of your hosts today, and I'm so honored to bring to you this inspiring conversation. We are so honored to have our speakers with us today. And before we begin, a quick note, we encourage you to engage by submitting your questions in the chat or to use the Q&A section. Now, before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. As I've said, I'm Elizabeth Johnson. Yad esh Elizabeth Johnson yunashye adana elishanigi kia ani nishle do tina dine bashishtin tora chitni dasha che do tora chitni dasha nale akut ego adana sa nishle tkot ka dana sha ndehos do ishogan. Community Engagement and Programs Manager, Saknis Dishes Nashnish. I am an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, so I just introduced myself in Navajo. I am the Community Engagement and Programs Manager here at SACNIS. I'm so happy to be here with you, but before we continue, I'll now hand over the mic to my colleague, AJ.
Dakyapi, Lakota Tau Choko Tawi Machiapi na Ea Swashichua Alexander Holder Machiapi, Malakota na Kirikirish na Hochangada Wayaha Macha, Nahan Yon Chante Washte Nape Chiuzapi, Maihade Raja Alexander Holder Hingadena, Shaha Raja Tau Choko Tawi Hingadena, Ma Kedapana Noop Naga Sacha wa U Nangshana. Jagukira. Hi everyone, my name's AJ Holder. I'm Ogal Lakota, Winnebago, Wichita, Sac and Fox, and Northern Cheyenne. I just introduced myself in Lakota and Ho-Chunk. I am the programs assistant here at SACNIS, and I'm excited to have this conversation with all of you here today. Next slide. Okay. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the original stewards of the lands we occupy. We recognize that we are joining this conversation from many different places with each with its own deep histories, cultures, and traditions shaped by Indigenous peoples. We honor the resilience, knowledge, and contributions of Native nations and Indigenous communities, past and present, who continue to care for these lands and whose legacies shape the world we live in today. This acknowledgement is a call to reflect, learn, and take action in supporting Indigenous voices and self-determination. We encourage you to take a moment to recognize the lands you are on and learn about the Indigenous peoples whose lands you reside upon. If you'd like to learn more, we invite you to visit the link provided in the chat to explore history and contemporary presence of Indigenous communities in your area.
Thank you, AJ. There is a link in the chat. Now, before we officially begin, I'd like to extend an invitation for you all to join SACNIS and to be part of a thriving STEM community. At SACNIS, science, culture, and community are more than just words. They are the heartbeat of our organization and what we do. We create spaces where STEM students and professionals from historically excluded backgrounds can feel a true sense of belonging, can embrace their intersectional identities, and are empowered to bring their whole selves to STEM. Whether that is being in your traditional regalia, how you do your research, or communicating with other members in our community, we invite you to become a SACNIS member today. As a member, you'll gain access to a nationwide network of STEM professionals, students, and mentors, professional development opportunities through webinars such as this one, workshops and leadership programs, mentorship and community support to help you grow wherever you are in your STEM journey, and exclusive member opportunities such as member discounts on SACNIS programs and events, including our annual conference. Join us and be a part of a movement that's shaping the future of STEM. Sign up today. I will be dropping a link here in the chat very soon for more details.
Today, we have the privilege of hearing from two fantastic speakers who I will have introduce themselves. And can both of you share a little bit about your research as well as your background? And we can start out with Dr. Josiah.
Aloha mai kako. Mahalo so much, mahalo nui loa for inviting me here. Let me share a little bit about myself. So I'm a professor at Georgia Tech, which is on Muskogee Creek and Cherokee lands. You may know it as Atlanta, Georgia. Um, it's currently bright and sunny, and the collards have been harvested, and now we're moving on to hoping tomatoes are going to come up. Anyway, you don't need to know about that. My work, I'm in the College of Computing, as I said, and now tenured professor, so I've had a while to do different things. But the things that we do in the lab, which is called Ka Moa Moa, are around sustainable computing and computing for sustainability. So my research as a PhD in computer science was focused on how to build these computing and AI systems, how to make them faster, right, more efficient. And that wasn't always what fit best for me. I don't want it to necessarily be faster, more efficient. I want it to be respectful of Aina. So Aina is land. You can see some of it in the background. Aina's Kalo, our Kalo or Taro, Haloa, which is our older brother in our pathways. How do these systems take care of our older brother? How do they take care of us? How do they restore our land? And so a lot of my work is within that, the technical details of redesigning these systems so that they respect land and people. And maybe I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. We want to pass it to our next speaker.
Hi, Tatsmewi Monique West Cups Ni My name is Saban Henry, and thank you for inviting me here today. And I don't have a cool background like that, but anyway, I'm coming here from Idaho. It's like central Idaho, and then the Pacific Northwest area, um, specifically kind of the lands that I cover in my work. I work on salmon recovery for our fisheries department, so we cover a lot of the Chinook salmon, steelhead, coho, sturgeon, lamprey, a lot of the native species that are in this area. So that involves all the way from the Columbia River in Oregon, Washington into the ocean. So, yeah, my work pretty much revolves around research and monitoring these species. A lot of the stuff I do is kind of tracking the migration, a lot of mortality where that occurs, spawning habitat for these fish. And so, yeah, so I get to cover a wide variety of states. And so I get to see a lot of the different lands in this area. And so it kind of evolves around kind of just managing and monitoring kind of the species and impacts that are occurring at different stages of their life cycle. And so that's kind of what my work evolves around. And yeah, so.
Thank you both so much. We have prepared some questions, but for our audience, you guys are more than welcome to submit questions in the Q&A or in the chat. So now we'll dive in with our first question. So either of you can answer first, but our first question is, can you share your journeys in your field and how your identity as Indigenous professionals has shaped your career paths and purpose in STEM?
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, so kind of just going back to being in this field of, I guess, fisheries in the realm of like science-based, knowledge is growing up here, you it kind of evolves like the importance of salmon to our culture and our people, the Nez Perce people, Nimipu people, um, derived from these lands, and our creation story comes from here. So in the story, the first, I guess, relative animal to get up and say they give their life for us two-legged that were coming was salmon. So that kind of started like the importance for our tribe is, why do we research salmon so much? Why do we care so much? Because historically before these dams in the Snake River in Columbia, salmon sustained our life. Like a lot of tribes, there was always, an animal that sustained the people. And so Chinook salmon specifically was very important to our people. And, we could, one person could have, thousands and hundreds of pounds of salmon per person. So, the biggest, run in history was the Columbia River. People think of Alaska as salmon, but historically the Columbia River had the most. So that kind of shaped me into like, why I entered this field is kind of just caring for that for, we talk about the seven generation model, right? So we have generations before us, this generation and after us, kind of model. So that kind of encouraged me to enter this field and, had a lot of family members that are also research in fisheries and went to school, learned about that and applied our science, knowledge, with our culture is important. So, yeah, so that's kind of how I entered this type of work.
I'll add too. Mahalo though, that was awesome. Like I for me, like so I'm diaspora Kanaka. So my grandmother, my tutu, married a sailor in like the 50s. Um, and so she was born in the territory of Hawaii before we were a state. Well, are we a state? Anyway. Um, and she and all of my aunties married haoles, white guys, because that was kind of what was expected for integration. Because and this is recent history, folks. And so then she moved to North Carolina during the middle of the Civil Rights Movement. And so a lot of our language was lost in that time within our family. We have since, come back slowly, and my parents and my siblings now live back on Aina, in homeland. But part of the journey for me was rediscovering my connection to Aina, and then recognizing that the things that I was learning, because I was like, oh, I gotta get one job, brother. Computing, that's a job. Ooh, yeah, I like it. Tech, yes. but then recognizing like, ooh, this is an extractive thing. This is a very extractive industry. This is potentially, ruinous for, my people and all people. And so taking the things I was learning and immediately applying them, learning about myself and my culture and immediately applying them within how we build systems was kind of what opened both new paths into research, but also made me recognize that, oh, I'd been doing it the whole time because our people, and I think our people, I'm saying this maybe even larger scope, but Hawaiians were 1,000 years ago building these massive engineering works across the entire island to collect and capture rainwater, spring water, and then connect it to fish ponds called loko'ia. And we were engineers for 1,000 years, and we continue to be. And so that connection of technology and not necessarily making a distinction between computing and AI nowadays to technology that we had was also kind of something that triggered in my mind in this journey. So, yeah, mahalo.
Thank you both. And I think that you both touched on our second question, which is how do you integrate Indigenous perspectives or knowledge systems into your research, your teaching, or your professional practice?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one first. Yeah, I kind of touched a little bit on that, just, base it around the culture, it's our culture and everything we do is alive and it's thriving. We have a language that's verbal based, right? So it's like, you know, English is, a lot of noun based, things. And so if you have a live language, that in itself is already, speaking, how you incorporate both science and, culture. And like I said, the integrating that into research is, a little bit difficult, at least in fisheries, because a lot of times that's like the last, little thing you'll kind of talk about, right? So this is a very strong data management research kind of project, which is this is what the data says. This is, this is the come all end all, right? So incorporating culture in that is a little bit difficult if those that don't understand the importance of it. So for myself, I try to, incorporate language, song, history, story that, when our program first started, we had, just a few people, a few elders that, wanted to research more about fisheries, and so using that as a background tool to like, how can we incorporate our ceremonies? And so we have ceremonies that evolve, this type of work. But of course, it's very driven by, science models and, how can you model these type of data that we collect, whether if it's salmon tracking the, movement or whatever that is. So that's kind of just how, I lead with, using our culture.
Do you want us to answer each? Because I do have a quick story on this one. Okay. So maybe one example that I think is interesting is, and this is not me, but this is this group. I think this was also with Noah Lincoln. Was this with Noah Lincoln at University of Hawaii, as well as Makali'i Metrics, who do a bunch of soil sampling, and they're all Kanaka brothers. And there is this mention in older Hawaiian texts of this method for planting taro or kalo that is intended to make huge corms, right? And the corm is what you use. You got the big leaves, the huli, and the leaves out, and then you got the corm. You take the corm, cut it, pound it. That turns it into poi, right? After you steam it and do things. So like key food, superfood. And so it was like a recipe in this older, Hawaiian observation. It's called pakukui. The idea is you take a big hole, you put a bunch of kukui leaves in it, and then instead of just filling the whole trench with water like you normally do with taro, you have these kukui leaves that slowly break down. And that was kind of in these older texts. So the researchers, were like, okay, well, kukui is also kind of not as around the island anymore, but we got a lot of eucalyptus because of attempts by plantations to get carbon credits. And plantations are the bad guys, just, for those that aren't from Hawaii. And so can we use the eucalyptus to do the same type of thing. And so then they took that in, they had soil sampling, so, kind of these very modern ways to sequence, understand the soil. They had other types of sensors, and they went through a whole cycle of this pakukui, and indeed, using the invasive plants as this nutrient base, not using water like a traditional kalo system, and then measuring all the kind of changes, they were able to see, yes, actually our ancestors were onto something. And now we've kind of replicated what they've done, but done it in our place, in our situation we have now, and also captured data around how it kind of makes an impact. And so that's kind of, I think there's more like this, but as already mentioned, right, by my brother, right, we need many more examples and many more folks maybe on this call to kind of build out those amazing ideas.
Thank you both for those amazing answers. Our third question is, have you faced any obstacles in your academic or professional journey? What has helped you stay grounded or stay resilient during this journey?
Yeah, I think navigating we go to school and we learn in this Western education, which that in itself, we're that less than 1% of people, indigenous people that study this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of obstacles we face. I think not just myself, all of us included. Um, because we approach with different values than others. We have different virtues and values that some of us may have been raised with. For myself, being raised in ceremonies and culture, language, history, certain things are important that a lot of academic based knowledge isn't, right? So certain things that I learned growing up, isn't relevant in academia, whether if that's, experience through generations, or stories in history, like of something that you can't represent, through numbers or data collection kind of thing. But I guess kind of how I've moved throughout that kind of learning is just staying grounded with the things that I've value in my career, which is, again, incorporating that cultural knowledge in the type of work I do. Um, and it also starts with educating a lot of the youth because, eventually, we want to be a reflection of, the ones before us and, leave that after us as, the next generation is gravitating towards this type of work. Um, so that's kind of a way that I've stayed, grounded in this type of work and learned to, just have a, short-minded, be able to turn around, things that may not have worked well or, I may not be strong in a certain area of learning, but, I could, figure out a way to move, especially in, Western education. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely got to find. I was blessed when I was at Northwestern University uh, as a new assistant professor that there was an organization called the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research that had been set up by Patty Lowe and Pam Silas. Pam Silas was the former CEO and president of ACES, which many of you might also be familiar with. Um, and they created a community of indigenous folks from all over, right? But and a community nonetheless, and that was very helpful. And so I think adding on to what was just said, finding that community of folks to interact with and have a small circle, super helpful. And then finding mentors, like my mentor was as a PhD student, finding mentors that really understand and are there to support you and understand the situation, and I guess what we would call the kuleana, the responsibility that you bear as an indigenous person, that you must fulfill, right? So I was blessed to have a mentor that um, understood that, and that was really key to success. Um,
I love that, both of you. Thank you. I'm going to go off script really quick. So, surprise question. In our part one discussion, both of our panelists brought up mentoring. Um, both have brought up a math teacher. Who was your mentor that really sparked going into your fields, if you had one?
I can lead off on this one because I just talked about them. So mine was my and maybe it was a succession, but I was, and there were different folks along the way, but someone that just really sticks out was my PhD advisor. And I know that's late for many folks, but he wasn't actually my PhD advisor until he convinced me to do a PhD. And I think that's the key thing. And so I was basically hanging around in undergrad because they were paying me like chump change, but whatever. It was still money to code and to do some stuff in computing. And then my advisor, who he would come to be my advisor, he had just finished a postdoc at Dartmouth, very fancy, and came in, hot stuff, and was like, "Hey, look at these little things." I was like, "What the hell is that?" He's like, "This is a little mobile computer." I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool! I can take computers outside on the INA." Suddenly, that exploded my brain, and then he also helped me understand and remove the gates that I didn't realize existed, and the barriers that I didn't realize existed to having success in academia, because there are so many that you have to have someone kind of be like, "Hey, watch out for that tripwire," before you kind of jump in. And that was a very key person that kind of it was excited about sustainability. That was his term for it, and I accepted that term. Um, and computing, and then very conscious of the different stupid gatekeeping stuff that happens when you try and go after a PhD. And then he just convinced me to do a PhD. I was like, "What else are you gonna do? Like, you just hang around and like do research and stuff." I was like, "Oh, really? Yeah, and they'll pay you nothing. Is that nice?" I was like, "Oh, cool." I don't know how that worked. You Jedi mind tricked me, but it worked out. Not quite nothing, but not a ton.
Yeah, something similar, kind of couple mentors I've reflected on, but one of the ones that kind of stood out more to me growing up was Elder, and he passed away now, but the thought of like going into school and pursuing, a higher level graduate school and being in that kind of program kind of encouraged me to research what's important to me, right? Research, that's the foundation of, why you research thing is like, why? Why do you want to learn more about this? What's important to you? So having that foundation and to go into academia is like important to have like a question that's important and you feel like, you want to learn more about. And so leading with that, growing up, seeing, the transition of, different stages of that, my mentor's life into the later stages where I got to travel a lot and with him and, we got to hear stories and, a lot of the history that he had, about not just salmon culture, but just, a general, like the things that, how we view the world, and then using that knowledge and basing that into my, academic learning. And I felt like that kind of drove me to like, finish and also encourage, like I said, the youth into pursuing something like that, whether if that's in school or if that's just learning, through observation out, the things that we do in everyday life, it doesn't have to be, something in STEM, but like, as we learn whether if you're fishing, hunting, gathering, all these types of things we talk about, that's, that's learning in itself. So that's kind of how I've learned from him.
Yeah, kind of going off what you just touched on, what advice would you give to Native or Indigenous students who are interested in STEM but may not see themselves represented in these fields yet?
Yeah, I'll go. Kind of using my master work I did, I developed a program part of that, and it was specifically based for Nez high school students here on the reservation. And we had a group of students throughout each summer, and we traveled to different culturally sensitive areas, and we got to research both science-based tools, incorporating that with our cultural stories, history, song, language, all of it. And we took a lot of these elders with us, and if you have elders in your community, it's kind of hard for them to travel, whether if that's through health or whatever that is. So we're very thankful that we could take some with us that were traveling with us, and we move together as a community family, and you see things. And just for example, we went to a place in Oregon, Northeast Oregon, and it's one of our places that's original homelands of our people. And we're a treaty tribe, so we get express our treaties, usual custom areas, extending through our borders of reservation. Just because we're in Idaho doesn't mean we restrict just to Idaho. So we can go into Montana, we can go into the Columbia, Oregon, Washington. But anyway, we observed this plant, a cultural plant, and how it was kind of being invaded by invasive species of other plants. And so we kind of measured, we talked about, mentioned soil, we measured soil, we measured the abundance, the density, the size of these plants. So the students got to see that and then, measure, like I talked about those things. And then also you get to hear the story from, we had a grandma with us that talked about the relationship to these plants, why it's important to our people, the oral history of like why this came to be. So that in itself is kind of, relating both those together. And then at the end, we kind of just discussed like, how do they see themselves in this type of work, whether if they're working in any type of work, they just did it themselves there. So I think that's a good kind of leading them into why, you can relate this because we are the oldest scientists in the world. Indigenous people have been practicing science for generations. It's nothing new to us, just because, now we have programs dedicated to it, which helps, but also just to see ourselves as, oldest living scientists because we've researched this before, language is even written. So I think that's important to think about too. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's feels like there's an abundance of opportunities now, and like find your folks, jump in, join in, do something before high school and college and all those things. And man, I love what you just said about we've been doing science, we've been doing engineering for generations, and I think also that's helpful too to have that knowledge and be empowered by it because I've definitely, and I know this is true uh, for you as well, right? Been in rooms and there have been very obvious things to us where it's like, yeah, that's very obvious. And then Western scientists will be like, you guys, I just had this amazing realization. Like, no, what? Wait, no, no, no. We all knew this was the case before, right? And then you recognize that, wow, you do have something that you can see before others do because of your background, because of who you are, because of your ancestry, mo'oku how, that others don't. So, like, be empowered that you have that advantage and use it.
Well, I want to say thank you both. We don't have any questions in the Q&A section, but I want to thank you both for your discussion today. We open our floor to the audience if you guys have any last minute questions before we wrap up today. Um, but yeah, we'll give y'all a couple seconds to type up anything if you guys wish, and if not, I'll pass it off to Elizabeth.
I like pausing for dramatic effect, just in case somebody wants something else. I don't see anything coming in, but I did actually have a question, or I guess more of a continuation of what you both said. I love the we are the oldest scientists, and it kind of brings us back to the vision that Sackness has, which is bringing your whole self to STEM. Your whole self is your language, it's your culture, it's your background, it's your lived experiences, it's the active path that you are currently on. And I find that beautiful. Um, so I guess my question to you is one of the hardest things, I come from a professional background of higher education, so working with Native students and providing them that support. And one of the biggest things that I saw my students struggle with was leading with authenticity. We've heard for quite some time resiliency, but what are your strategies to help you with walking that path of resiliency and leading with authenticity?
That's a hard question. I'll try. Authenticity and resiliency. I think this is also a practiced thing. Maybe it's because all of us, well, most of us, I'd actually probably all of us have gone through kind of the Western hit, right? And sometimes we have to pull ourselves out of that. But I think part of it is I think of it as like ceremony and protocol. And so bringing ceremony and protocol, recognizing that it belongs not just on your home or your land, but also in the research lab and the wet lab. And so that's why we named my lab Ka Moa Moa, which is the name of the most, farthest point of the Hawaiian voyaging canoe, the Va'a, which you've probably seen in Moana. And that's where the Akua or the spirit guy sits, and that's the Akua, the spirit that guides the folks in the Va'a in that canoe on their journey. And so that was for me an intentional decision to make sure that we were always thinking about how ceremony and protocol was at the very start of the lab, because the name of the lab itself was originated in ceremony and protocol with our kumu on what it should be, how it should be. So I think that was a start, and then it's just consistently engaging and thinking and introducing yourself, the way you introduce yourself, the way you engage. And I think that's for me at least, that's been the most important part, and I still practice it and still have to practice it.
Yeah, just going off, kind of that is similar to just using, um, yeah, engaging within our community and incorporating, like I said, in this department, we have a lot of non-native researchers, right, scientists, and for myself, I bring that, knowledge and history and all that into these discussions, where there's, a little less than, um, us travel members in this department because it's like I said, it's dominated by data and how smart are you, how educated you are in kind of Western science. But I feel like I've been resilient incorporating some of the things that others may not understand too well. So yeah, just going off kind of what he said is just mentioning that in those discussions and bring that to the table, like there's certain things in this area that you don't understand that you should be able to learn more about. What joining our department and not knowing too well about the areas that they're in is that itself already lacking, right? So we want to work in an area where we're familiar with, right? If we're whether that's a different community, different tribes, culture, history. I feel like that's important just to have a foundation, before you start, researching, why does this place exist? How did it exist? Ways that existed here before. Um, so yeah.
Thank you both. And we actually just got a question in the Q&A for both of you. What what does the future look like leading with our Indigenous knowledge in contemporary science?
I can speak about one, mostly because I was asked to write out a page on what that might look like. But um, we're in computing, so I think about what AI looks like within that space. And there's a lot of folks, or a number of folks within the abundant intelligences movement, which is Dr. Jason, who's a Kanaka scientist, talking about how we think of machines and AI as kin, what that actually means, and how to be careful about that. And so I think if we're leading in that way, it's like how do I build a data center that is not reliant on minerals extracted from indigenous mines in Chile? In Argentina, how does a data center or a computing infrastructure look like if it provides the heat and nutrient flow for a kalo, a taro patch, right? So I think it's those types of futures that are interesting, at least from that narrow computing and AI lens that I think of within my own field. I'd be interested in what that the fisheries thought is on that too, though.
Yeah, I think for myself, being in this type of work, most recently within the past, I don't know, few years, more and more papers, more and more researchers wanted to understand more about indigenous, I guess views on how their research is. So for example, like there's a question that we recently came up with is how is nutrient derived or marine derived nutrients, which is just referring to like, when fish, salmon spawn, they die and their life cycle is completed. So they spawn here, they go to the ocean, they come back, and they die, and that's it. Um, so I guess how has that impacted, the surrounding streams and rivers, right? Because if these fish don't come back and spawn and die, then where are those nutrients going to go? What are bugs going to eat? What are the bears going to eat? The predators, like those types of birds, so um, and in that self is like, you have the data in Western, studies, like, they can research that by, you know, measuring the abundance of, how much, macroinvertebrates there are, or, bugs. Um, but I guess, now they want to, see the views of our people, like what is the natural law of that says that, the salmon, their life cycle says that they're going to die. The story says that they'll come back for us so we can live. So we already knew that was going to happen. Um, so yeah, I guess just like approaching that with like, like I mentioned, the researchers, beginning to want to understand some more of the views of our people, and incorporating that into their outcomes and what they learned about, their question. So I see some of that more relevant nowadays in some papers is, they'll have some mentioning like some stories and perspectives on that are based on indigenous, culture.
Thank you both. We also have another question in the chat as well, so I'll read. I am curious if either of you ever experienced hardships between what science says can be and and is true versus any cultural practices or traditional knowledge you grew up with. And if so, how do you approach this identity crisis? Um, this person struggles with how their spirituality aligns and makes sense with modern science.
Do you have anything on that one? I'm trying to think of
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. I mean, science is it's a very interesting philosophical question. Science is constantly moving, so I guess the most interesting. No, no, it's great. One of the interesting things that happened this past week was there was a study that talked about the interstitium uh, as a mechanism for fluid flow between, and I'm going to embarrass myself because I'm not going to get it right. Fluid flow that was not in on the skin and not under like within the flesh, and it basically the study gave a lot of direct support for the impacts of acupuncture, right? Which is a very ancient technique, and for I remember growing up being like, oh, that's voodoo, which is also like, wow, how did you be racist twice when you said that person? Um, and so I think like science is constantly moving. We're rediscovering and doing things. Uh, a lot of the things that have come from my own personal background were based on what we call kilo. So Hawaiian word for observation is kilo. We sit in one place every day, same time, and look and observe, and then capture that for years. And that was our practice and process. And so I've never actually had that level of identity crisis that you talk about, Victoria. But maybe it's because I viewed it more as like, oh, we're keeping on kiloing, we're taking in new information. Like it just we're lucky because that kilo practice started thousands of years ago. And so I'm just kind of continuing to add on. And so like I guess that's how I philosophically look at it. Did I buy you enough time to think of one?
Yeah, similar with that, I think kind of going off kind of like the fish subject. Recently, within the past like 5, 10 years, we incorporated wolves back in this area. So we had a pack of wolves, and incorporating that back into these lands. Again, this is a historical cultural species to our people, but in Idaho, very state that's doesn't agree with a lot of the things most people in this, our community do. Um, the aspect of incorporating wolves back into our community, it's more of a relationship that's built there, and it's always existed. But now you have you have farmers and ranchers. These wolves shouldn't be here, right? So, but before that, we've existed and we've had a relationship with wolves, and so I think bringing them back in this lands in this area is important for not only for us, for the ecosystem, for the communities. And so I think science really lacks in some of the studies that could be in this area particularly. Of course, there's other studies that I've mentioned before, the impacts of wolves, and they're mainly negative, again, how they impact livestock or whatever that may be. But like I said, as a spiritual aspect of that, there's a lot of stories and ceremonies based around these species of wolves. So I think kind of example about that. Also trying to incorporate in the future some grizzly bears back in this community, this area. Again, these animals have existed here in these mountains. So I think that's kind of one example I can think of again, science lacks about understanding of that than our spiritual knowledge does. So yeah.
Thank you both for those answers. We do have another question in the Q&A. It's for both of you guys as well. Do you have any specific ways that you would suggest incorporating Indigenous ways of knowing into adolescent science education?
Yeah, real quick one. Although I bet we have some good ones. One thing we did was you saw, or you didn't see, but the fish pond, the local IA. One thing we've done to teach computer science, as another kind of tool in our Techie Tech toolbox, was to take sensors, embedded systems, and go out and use that to Kilo. So I already told you about Kilo. So maybe we can have our little tiny sensors that we build, those little machines, do some of that Kilo for us, and then we can kind of engage with the data process around fish ponds, local IA, and things that we as Kanaka are trying to restore. And so I love kind of the learning process when it's, adolescent learning process when it's connected to something that's culturally important and grounded that we care about. And so it reinforces the cultural connection to these important places and food, as well as connects that technology, the fish pond technology in Hawaii, to the technology that we're learning now around computing.
Yeah, kind of similar with that is yeah, just being place-based learning, right? So learning in a community, learning in these cultural areas that are significant to us, which you don't get that in classroom. You don't get that learning, from a book. You get that from observation. You get that from feeling your hands in the dirt, feeling the blood of an animal, whatever it is, that's where you get that, learning is, and I talk about like our language is alive, we speak it, we see it, and then, we go out and practice it and do it. And so I think again, like I said, play space in your area, learning that way. And there's so many things here in this community and that we've learned. And so I think leading with that is important also.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. As we wrap up today's incredible discussion, I want to first thank both of you for this wonderful discussion. It was truly inspiring. We appreciate the time and the knowledge you've shared with us today. I also thank our attendees, both those who are joining us live and those who are joining us for the recording and being a part of this conversation. We encourage you to keep the dialogue going and continue supporting Indigenous voices in STEM. A follow-up email will be sent out soon with a recording of this email and any resources shared during the event. So if either of our speakers have any links or anything they want to share with me, we can include that in our follow-up email, as well as a short survey. We'd love to hear your feedback to help us improve our future events. Once again, thank you all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. I saw somebody who had their hand raised. Did y'all see that too?
They're clapping.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Mahalo. Aloha.